What's up peeps, Rockskull here. Since I was one of the major proponents of the 66 test for a while now, I wanted to give my own thoughts on the playtest Overwatch 2 just recently had on it. Before we begin, I know the test isn't technically over currently, as they just moved it to the arcade tab, but let's be real, if something moves to the arcade tab, it typically dies pretty easily. I will talk about the feel of each role individually for me, and then give my overall thoughts at the end. Beginning with my positives of Tank in 66, off-tanks finally feel like they fit into the game again. Zarya and D.Va in particular always felt odd in 5v5, as their kits always seem built around assisting another tank player. Trying to fit tanks like that in a 5v5 environment is very difficult, unless more drastic changes were done to their kits. To me, they always felt like they didn't belong, even with metas around them just happening because their kits are super overtuned. In 6v6, they can assist the other tank, and not worry about taking the job of holding the front line all the time. You can hold it off angle, or even assist your backline without as much worry. Even a wacky tank like Roadhog fits into this format better, I think, as he often does better doing his own thing instead of being that frontline guy. Next, we got the return of the lovely tank combos. A lot of the old tank combos like Ryan Zar, Wrecking Ball Winston, etc. bring a lot more fun strategy and depth I did miss from the game. Even using some of the new tanks and trying to combo them has been really fun. Something about the way Overwatch combos tanks together is honestly what makes it pretty unique, as unlike other games, the old tanks were kind of designed to play with one another. Another additional thing that is an obvious upside now is a lot less pressure on the tank player. As mentioned before, you don't have to do multiple jobs at once while playing a tank in 6v6. In 5v5, you really have to choose between assisting your backline or helping the frontline depending on the situation. If I'm being honest, I do like that aspect of 5v5 at times, but I understand why most people don't. Being the center of attention will lead to a lot of blaming and criticism coming your way, and a lot more pressure to perform. Next, we got the beautiful aspect of counterpicking being pretty much gone for tank. In 5v5, there's a huge problem of tanks just hard countering each other to win games. You're often forced in the face of the other tank in 5v5, and it leads to very unwinnable matchups if they are counterpicking you for most people. This really stinks as you don't get to play the tanks you want to play. It still is there in 6v6, no doubt, but a lot less severe when you got a tank to up your strengths and cover your weaknesses. The less severe HP and cooldowns on tanks to counter you directly are nice too. Final positive I want to mention here is that tank duels are now a more viable option with less HP pools. Typically in 5v5, you'd find the tanks kind of ignoring each other and going for the backline, as with those high HP pools they don't really die unless severely out of position. Tank duels, while still not the best option, will make you throw the game if you're targeting the enemy tank player. Now for some negatives I have about the tank experience in 6v6, first is the fact that some of the newer tanks don't really fit well in this format. Pretty much the opposite problem of off tanks. New tanks like Ramattra, Orisa, and Maga have more generalist kits, so it feels a bit harder to insert them into the 6v6 format. For example, I'm a Ramattra main, and I often find myself in situations where the enemy team comp just outbrawls or outpokes me if they are more specialized. I will say at least Junker Queen and Hazard feel like they fit the format a bit better, as their kits are more specialized. Next aspect I'm not a huge fan of at times is the larger dependency on your team as a tank. Team comps in general matter a lot more in 6v6, and if you have the wrong support duo, or your team doesn't want to go in with you, the game can feel a bit unwinnable. 5v5 was created on the idea of more individual agency, and you can get away with wackier team comps more often. I personally can really feel a difference at times in 6v6. Negative I have is that, as usual, the tank balance changes they did for this felt the most weird. Like taking a look at Ryan, he felt really uncomfortable to play, as they got rid of a lot of things that made him feel great on the switch to 5v5. Give my boy his second fire strike and the ability to turn his pin back. They also increased a lot of cooldowns that already had long cooldowns. Like you may only get to use Ramattra's shield once a fight with that 16-second cooldown. I would rather they decrease the potency of these long cooldowns instead of just making them even longer. This was a problem in 5v5 they just seem to keep doing. Just gonna say that most people don't like playing without their abilities in Overwatch Blizzard. It doesn't matter how potent those abilities are. One final negative I wanted to mention is just how fast you can blow up as tank in 66 now. This was a problem in the old days, but with the DPS passive still being in the game, it can feel really bad peeking a corner and just getting torn to shreds. I admit this could just be a personal skill issue thing too, being so used to 5v5. But as I said, this was a thing for me in 66 before. For the damage roll, one of the big things I like about DPS is finally being able to kill tanks now and take duels with them. In 5v5, they just had such massive health pools you just had to ignore them most of the time. Again, just like tank, it isn't the most favorable matchup, but it feels better. Another positive is more protection you gain from having another tank on the field, especially if you're one of those vulnerable ranged DPS. Having another tank to peel for you can be really nice. Peeking down main can be a little less scary too. This brings me to my final positive, where I found hit scan / range DPS to feel a lot better in the 6v6 format. Before in 6v6, there used to be so many shields and crap in the way that made a lot of these ranged DPS feel bad, but that really isn't a thing anymore. In 5v5, I often found myself on a ranged DPS being hit from every angle, and having to do super ballsy plays to get get anything done. Now, however, the game plays slower while giving you more protection, and it becomes a lot easier to get your shots in on the enemy team. You can't really do those wacky flank plays anymore, but you don't really need to in the 66 format, I found. For the negatives, one of the main things I noticed is that off angles are more contested and harder to get to. With another tank on the field, space on the map becomes a lot more controlled, and taking those flank routes or off angles becomes very difficult. This in turn makes individual plays a lot harder as DPS for me. A lot of the time you may find yourself just shooting down main trying to break a choke point instead of making more of those individual flank plays to win a fight. 66 is more about team plays and timing, I feel like. Flanking heroes like Genji, Tracer, and Echo become a lot more difficult for me too because of this. Trying to assassinate someone in 66 can feel super difficult with two big bodyguards in the way now. I'm not saying these characters won't work at all, it's a lot harder to make individual plays compared to the ranged DPS mentioned earlier in my opinion. On support, it has a similar positive to DPS where you just have a lot more protection with another tank body on the field. In the early days of Overwatch 2 5v5 especially, support was the most vulnerable it has ever been with flankers constantly on your bum. This did get better over time, but it was at the cost of supports feeling a bit more like DPS than supports. I know there are a lot of people out there who want to play support to, well, support their teammates better, but doing that in 5v5 became a lot less viable. In 66, you're given a lot more protection, and thus given more opportunity to focus on doing support things a lot more. Additionally, in 66, healing is a lot more spread out with less HP pools, so you don't have to focus it all on one guy anymore. To me, this leads to a lot more interesting support gameplay, as you have to support things all over the battlefield and can have more of those clutch save moments. This does, however, make healbotting feel like a bit more viable of a strategy. It does depend on what you like doing as support more, but personally, I do like making my DPS plays from time to time when I'm playing the role. It hurts a lot on those supports who are given DPS focused kits like Iliari or Zen. Another negative I've seen is that support team combo duos matter a lot more. The thing about 5v5 is that everybody's quite a lot more independent, so you can kind of get away with wacky support comps like Lucio Zen or Zen Mercy. In 66, however, you need at least one of what most people like to call a main healer to get by. Those who can output a lot of healing, as keeping those two tanks up is no easy task. You may even feel forced to run double main support if the tanks are getting rolled during a fight. This sort of runs into the counterpicking issue for me where you feel forced to switch to something you don't want to play, and that's rarely a fun experience. Now when it comes to my overall thoughts of the playtest, there were a couple things that stood out across the board. For positives, I do like that fights last a lot longer and include more strategic depth from both sides. You can be sitting at those chokes for a while. Making small outplays to the enemy team to push forward can be a huge difference maker. When you get picked off in those team fights, your team often still has a big opportunity to come back too. While in 5v5, one guy getting picked off feels like a fat GG more often than not. As a tank player, while I still like certain aspects about 5v5's tanking more, I do think 66 is more healthy on the tank experience as a whole for most people. A lot less pressure on the player, less counterpicking, and fun tank combos all make that experience feel a lot better. Speaking of combos, I do honestly really like the heavier emphasis on teamwork 66 has. This can be a big downside at times, as you all probably know how those random teammates can be like. But when you do get it to work, it feels awesome. Getting a perfectly timed bubble on your Rhine to save them, timing a dive perfectly with your team, etc. This pretty much goes into my point of having high highs and low lows. This is a bit of a neutral thing about 66, and it depends on what you like about the game if it ends up being positive or negative. Now going to those negatives, it does really feel like individual playmaking is a lot less common in this format. Fights are sort of long stalemates at choke points because of having two tanks holding it, and it can be tough to try and get epic individual plays out of that. Getting anything done in 66 requires a team effort, and that kind of playstyle might not be for everybody. Next, I personally feel like DPS and support felt more like a side grade in a lot of ways for me here. You gained a lot more protection on both roles, but at the cost of individual capability to make plays. Again, something like this depends on the person, and some may prefer depending on teammates a bit more rather than making plays themselves. Personally, though, on DPS and support, it's not something I often find enjoyable. The extra protection is nice, which is why it's a side grade for me, but the feel of the roles is a big mixed bag for me. Final thing is a bit minor, but an obvious downside, and that being visual clutter. A lot of those newer tank ults at once especially can be so much visual clutter. It's freaking insane. I often find myself just punching in random directions with Ramatra ult, as I can't even see what's going on. Overall here, personally, 66 is about what I expected for the most part. Pretty nice experience on tank having someone else back you up, but the other roles can be kind of a mixed bag in my opinion. I've honestly found myself altering between 66 and 5v5 and enjoying both. So a big possibility I could see in this game's future is having both of these formats up at once. The devs actually said they would be doing this if the 66 test was a success. I fear, though, that the devs will struggle to keep balance up between both modes. They already seem to struggle big time with a lot of things when it comes to 5v5, and I'm not sure how they could upkeep two formats at once unless they got separate teams doing it. Talking about the elephant in the room, Marvel Rivals, they need to decide on these big things now to have the game be a successful competitor against it in the far future. The game will always have people like me who enjoy Overwatch a bit more than Marvel Rivals for whatever reason, but those Steam numbers don't lie. That's going to conclude my thoughts on the 66 experiment. You can let me know in the comments what you thought of it and what you believe the future of Overwatch should be. Thank you all for the support as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Rock skull. All he wants to do is stream all night. Lobby full. Rock skull. Never gonna play with me, but it's alright.